So we just drove an hour and a half down to Portland, Maine. It's Monday afternoon, actually. We just had an interview with Martin Key, the gem cutter who handles all the recutting and jewelry world work around here. And it just so happens that his son owns a now famous lobster roll company called High Roller Lobster.
These poor people have never had a lobster roll. Luckily for them, they're at the High Roller. They're about to experience the ultimate lobster roll.
We're at the potato donut shop. We spent the night in Portland last night, and we've got another interview this morning. This one I'm very excited by. Cross Jewelers. They are probably, as far as we've heard, the main jeweler who's promoting Maine tourmalines in Maine, but they also have a very important faceting machine from the 20s and 40s that we want to go check out that should give me the final clue that I need in order to piece together the story of Maine gem cutting and the gem cutting machines here. So here we are in Cross Jewelers, and we've just pulled some old machines out of the boxes. These are from the 1920s up till 1931, and some of these have never been looked at before. So we've got a machine for cutting, a machine for polishing, and already an indexing system that's changeable. Very incredible, cool pieces that nobody's really looked at ever. Wow, once again, we pulled out all the old machines. They started pulling boxes out of the basement. Intended to only go there for an hour or two, and we were there for about 4 hours. So the mystery unfolding before my eyes is just so satisfying. You know, you show up with all these questions, and then the more things that come out of the old boxes, the more questions get answered, but then you got new questions that pop up. And some of the stuff just blew my mind, like seeing the transfer block from the 1920s. It's just like, wow, okay, he was so ahead of his time. Nobody had a transfer block yet. And just the way that he had all of his cutting laps separated with different splash guards for each grit. He had a different head for cutting and polishing. He had different index gears. I mean, it was so much like the modern machine, yet not. So the subtitle of this week's adventure is Lovecraft Country. You know, as we leave Maine, going down into New Hampshire and Massachusetts and Rhode Island especially, we are in the realm of the fictional works of author H.P. Lovecraft. Now, if you don't know who H.P. Lovecraft is, you should definitely check out a video that I posted a couple weeks ago. It's something like, what does H.P. Lovecraft and mineralogy have to do with each other? Lovecraft has really nothing to do with this expedition or this fascinating research journey. He's just an author that I really like, and since we're going through some of the places where he talks in his stories and going through his hometown in Providence, I just thought it would be cool to show a little bit of his history in this vlog as we go through. So I'm currently in Manchester, New Hampshire. In some letters, Lovecraft said that his famous Arkham in the stories described in some of his letters as most similar to Manchester. And in Arkham is the famous Miskatonic University. And in the comic series of Providence by Alan Moore, he takes his character to Manchester to visit the real-life Miskatonic University, which is St. Anselmus College, which is where we currently are standing. Does this library house the dreaded Necronomicon? Since we left Maine yesterday, we've been driving through maybe the spookiest parts of New England, through New Hampshire and Massachusetts. And now we're in Danvers, which is a city that Lovecraft himself visited and enjoyed. And next we're gonna go to Salem. We just went to this amazing classic diner. It's a 1948 lunch car, train car, that came to Danvers in the 1950s and has been here as a diner ever since. And the inside has got some serious vibes. And right next door, so this is the Captain Samuel Fowler House, built in 1809. Lovecraft came here in 1923 when it was being run by a historical society. And he said he went from the attic all the way down to the basement and explored every nook and cranny of the house. And he was even allowed to put on a captain's hat and coat. So we are in Salem, site of the Salem witch trials in the late 1600s, full of antiquarian architecture, which Lovecraft was a big fan of. So this is the witch house in Salem. Lovecraft visited here in 1923, and this house, which was actually a place where some of the witch inquisitions happened, this inspired him in his story Dreams of the Witch House, which is all about strange interior angles, strange geometry that ends up creating a doorway into other dimensions. So the house is from 1642, restored in 1946, and it's pretty spooky looking in its dark visual. Lovecraft loved a gambrel roof, and there we have it. 2 angles making the gambrel. In Salem, and H.P. Lovecraft and Edgar Allan Poe are right in the window. The second potential location of the Miskatonic University. This is the last couple remaining buildings of the Essex Institute. It has that kind of classic New England educational architecture that you might associate with a place like Miskatonic U. Milo needed to get her wand. The wand chooses the puppy. And right next to the Essex Institute, we have the Crown and Shield Bentley House. This was also mentioned briefly by name in Dreams of the Witch House. The house on the hill overlooking the water. We made it to the ocean. The sky is Neapolitan ice cream. So it's early morning the next day, and I am at the first original Dunkin' Donuts, and by some strange act of fate, I'm here with,
what's up?
Eric Sherman, my old buddy from elementary school. So I have an idea. Let's try to go for the world record of most donuts eaten at once.
Oh God. Boston thereabouts.
And what is this crazy place? But it's a diner, and we got some vibes.
We are at the world's end.
Wow. It's Friday morning, and we are beginning our one-day Lovecraft walking adventure through Providence. So starting with what used to be 454 Angel Street. So this is where Lovecraft spent his early years. The building has been torn down, but this is where that building would have been. And it looks like there's even a little plaque over here. Let's go see what that is. So we're walking down Angel Street, and this would have been Lovecraft's neighborhood. So he lived within just a couple of blocks for most of his whole life, other than the brief period of time that he lived in New York City. But his birth home is just behind us, and his death home is just a couple blocks up the street. And these would have been the houses that he would have seen during his daily walks around Providence. So this is Brown University. This is just a few blocks from where Lovecraft lived. And lots of the characters in Lovecraft's stories are from Brown, or he mentions Brown. And some of the Brown buildings just have a really cool architectural style that you wouldn't really expect in a New England college. So this is the Van Wickle Gate of Brown University. It only opens twice a year, once to let students in, once to let students out. And there's a picture of Lovecraft sitting right here in the 1920s. And I'm gonna sit right there. I'm not sure if it feels especially Lovecraftian, but it's okay. So right across the street from the gate is the John Hayes Library. This is the library that now houses all of Lovecraft's manuscripts and all of Lovecraft's 100,000 handwritten and typed letters. And right next to the John Hay Library, we actually have a plaque to Lovecraft himself. Let's check it out. And it looks like there's even an exhibition right now online inside the John Hay Library, looking at the exhibition area and seeing what Providence might have looked like back in Lovecraft's day. This bookstore was one of Lovecraft's favorite haunts, and also a favorite of Edgar Allan Poe.
Yeah. Dog. That's Nathan.
It's fun to imagine Lovecraft sitting up here finding literature that would excite him and exploring fantastical worlds in his mind. Lovecraft and Lovecraft. This is where my two worlds meet. The gem section of Lovecraft's favorite library. Whitlock, one of the main characters of the story that I'm researching. So they even have a Lovecraft exhibition in the works. And this is the Lovecraft bookplate that inspired me to make my own bookplate for the Secret Teachings books that we released last year. You can see this one from his own library in his own handwriting. Lovecraft was very opinionated in his day, and this was one of the buildings that he despised. He didn't like this building, and he wrote about it, though it did feature in one of his stories at one point. Now, just up the street from the Fleur de Lis building is the Providence Art Club. Lovecraft writes about the art club in his letter where he returns home to Providence from New York City, moving, and he talks about going to an exhibition here with his aunts. So Lovecraft would have walked through these gates and into this gallery. Is this the ominous steeple that Lovecraft wrote about in The Haunter in the Dark, which houses some dark alien presence that eventually kills the writer, Robert Bloch? Not sure, but potentially ominous. Downtown Providence hasn't changed much since the 20s and 30s, so likely, not all of this, that one, but some of these older buildings would have been the same sort of skyline that Lovecraft saw in his Providence days. Actually, this steeple here in the middle looks more menacing and evil. Maybe it was that one. Next stop on the tour, Lovecraft Arts and Sciences. The official or enthusiastic Lovecraft shop of Providence. Uh-oh, the two worlds are intersecting again. At the corner of Prospect and Angel Street, we've got the commemorative plaque for the H.P. Lovecraft Memorial Square with a nice little squiddy motif around the edges. Not Lovecraft related, but digging these Art Deco style doors. The whole front of this building just screams with joy 1920s and 30s. Very cool. Here's the Cathedral of St. John. Both Lovecraft and Poe like to haunt this graveyard and invoke moody, dark, atmospheric surroundings, possibly inspiring some of their more chilling tales. I think if we came back here in a few hours at sunset or even after dark, it would be probably a lot creepier and spookier. Here, just up the hill from the cemetery, we're at the Prospect Park overlook. Another favorite hangout of Lovecraft and a great way to overlook and see the whole city. Let's check out the view. Another one of Lovecraft's homes. This is 10 Barnes Street. So this is the house that Lovecraft lived in after he spent 2 years in New York living with Sonia. And eventually when they sort of split up, he moves back to Providence and he moves into 10 Barnes Street, into one of the apartments. And he writes some of his best work, and also one of my favorite Lovecraft letters was written here, chronicling his return to Providence. The H.P. Lovecraft Historical Society has done a podcast version of it. The episode's called I Am Home. If you haven't listened to it, it's a wonderful journey through Lovecraft's words of describing all the joys of what he thinks is so special about Providence. I'm currently listening to it as I do this walking tour of Providence, and it's kind of funny to think, but all of the Lovecraft houses that I've seen today are all pretty much walking distance from Brown University, and they're all student houses, which means that some student somewhere is living and studying and sleeping in the rooms that H.P. Lovecraft lived and wrote his stories and his letters, and they probably don't even know. Here we've got the Ladd Observatory. This is a place that Lovecraft came when he was just a kid. It's an observatory for looking into the stars. And before Lovecraft had his mid-high school breakdown, he fancied himself going to the university and maybe possibly one day utilizing telescopes such as these. He remained an avid stargazer into his adulthood, but as far as I can remember, he never actually came back here later in life, possibly out of shame for having never continued his education, if I remember correctly. I'm at Butler Hospital. I don't know which of these buildings is old enough to be from the early 1900s, possibly this one. But this is where both Lovecraft's father and mother died. His father died when Lovecraft was young, possibly of syphilis, but no one actually knows. And his mother died halfway through Lovecraft's life in a sort of mental institution part. Here we have H.P. Lovecraft's last residence at 65 Prospect Street. Here in Swan Point Cemetery, we have the final resting place of Lovecraft and family. So this is the monument to his grandfather, Whipple Phillips, and extended family. And behind, mother and father, and finally the man himself, Howard Phillips Lovecraft. I am Providence. So another adventurous and historical week comes to a conclusion. My adventures of Lovecraft history are almost over. I'm going to go to New York City in a couple of days, and I might just see a couple more spaces where he lived whenever he was living there. But most of the Lovecraft country has been passed through, and my gem cutting adventures will continue with a lot of cool stuff happening in New York. So keep an eye on the social media and definitely come out if you want to. There's a couple of public events happening over this weekend and the next week. So I will see you guys from New York next week. See you later.